All right, guys, here we go with the notes for Chapter 6, talking about effective communication, effective listening, and trying to understand people. Now, in terms of what we're going to be talking about in this first section here, we're following this idea of this cycle of communication. It starts with the source. What is the origin of the information? And based on that, we put our message together within a specific way that's going to be delivered through a certain channel to the receiver of that message. Once the receiver has received the message, it is that person's turn to respond, and then we listen. And we listen with the intent to have a certain understanding of what is going on, not just with what is being said, but with some of the nonverbal cues that are going on as well. Based on that, there's going to be feedback from both sides of those involved in the conversation, and then the cycle starts all over again. So let's talk about some of these in detail. First off, the source. Again, it's the idea that there has to be an initiating origin of information in the communication process. So where is the information coming from? Where is its beginning? And there's going to be several characteristics that will enhance the credibility of a source. First off, is it trustworthy? Can we trust the origination of that information? Is there a certain amount of competence there? Is it absolutely outlandish or unbelievable? And that's going to also play into the trustworthiness. Objectivity, having the ability to see and understand both sides of an issue, a position, or an argument, not just relying heavily on one point of view. Recognize all the different points of view within a particular issue. Dynamism, the more dynamic, the more energetic, the more enthusiastic sources are, the more credible they're going to be. We tend to pay attention more to people that have a certain passion for a particular topic, even if we may not be completely interested in a certain topic. If we hear someone else getting excited about something, it does something for us. So a certain amount of a dynamic approach to what is being said. Expertise. Expertise comes from experience and in-depth knowledge of a product, a process, a medium, industry, any area of knowledge. So kind of the sense of having some credentials, which again kind of points back to the trustworthiness of something. Okay, so this shows the vanity of us as human beings, the physical attractiveness. People generally perceive a source of information to be credible if the source is physically attractive, at least according to the beholder's standards of beauty. Salespeople can enhance their physical attractiveness by good grooming. Make sure your hair is nice and tidy. Make sure your clothes are clean. Don't come in looking disheveled or like you just came out of bed or that you really don't care. Put a little effort into making yourself presentable. And then finally, similarity. People are simply more comfortable with people like themselves. There's not a whole lot we can do about this, at least when it comes to the physical aspect of things. But if, again, we can find those ways in which we can establish common ground with people, that's going to help us in terms of being able to have an audience with somebody. Now, some characteristics might be more important to some customers than others. So you have to listen and observe your prospect. You have to understand what characteristics and behaviors they seem to be comfortable with, and then emphasize your strengths in those areas. If you are able to relate to something that is a huge deal to them, or that you perceive as a certain criteria for them, do your best to try to appeal to that. At least if you can't do it on a certain level, the recognition of that is also going to help you in maintaining your audience. Now, let's go on to the message. Because it is crucial that customers comprehend the information you are verbally communicating, what you communicate should be kept relatively simple and easy to understand. The KISS method. Keep it simply simple. You don't want to try to throw a ton of information at them at one time. The information should all point back to one main idea, and be sure to repeat information. Repetition is a key factor in the strength of information and in the comprehension of that information. Another thing to do is to make sure that you have things laid out in a certain way that's easy to follow. Ordering effects are really good at this. A couple of thoughts here. People tend to remember what they hear first and what they hear last. So that's the idea of primacy and recency. So you remember what you hear first, and then you remember what you hear at the very end. So when you're presenting material, you want to make sure you start with your most important points first, and then repeat them at the end of a presentation in a really nice, concise summary. Kind of wrap it up in a bow, if you will. So you make sure that you really think about what your main idea is, and make sure to get that out at the very beginning in some fashion, and also end with that. So not only are you really pushing the emphasis of people remembering what you say first and what you say last, but you're using repetition in order to bring that point home. Now, the vehicle by which a message is communicated. That's what we mean in terms of the channel. Simple messages and presentations that tend to appeal to the emotions are going to be best remembered when presented in person or on video. To be able to see the person that is talking, to see their facial expressions, to see their body movements and their gestures, to be able to have people see the excitement and the passion that you have, and for that to carry a lot of weight. It's helpful if they can witness that and not just hear it in your voice, but look at the other things that are happening in conjunction with that. But now, if you have a lot of details that you need to put out, very complex presentations, those are going to be better delivered in writing. So you're going to want to supplement that with a booklet or with a PowerPoint presentation, so that you can combine what it is that you're saying and combine your gestures and your body movement and all of that with the actual data and the actual information for them to be able to read and take in at the same time. So this will engage people emotionally. It will also reinforce the major points of your written argument. Not to mention, you've got both the verbal and the visual, the writing, that all points to that same main idea. Now, let's talk about the person that you're talking to, the receiver. And we want to be very careful with how we talk about this. This is not in a way to try to minimize somebody, but it's more in just kind of perceiving who someone is and how they need to receive information. If there's somebody that's not as far along intellectually, if there's someone that's not very self-confident, these kinds of people might be slow to comprehend your arguments. You need to take a little more time with them, talk about them in more simplistic and direct terms. These people might yield to your intelligence quicker and easier. And they will also believe the last person that they talked to. So if you happen to know that you're in a situation where there's several different companies that are vying for someone's business, you want to try to be one of the last people, if not the last person, that gets to talk to that person. Meanwhile, someone that is more intelligent, someone that's more self-confident, they're going to require source credibility, objectivity, expertise, strong evidence, and message strength. They need the evidence of what it is that you're talking about in order to make what you're saying be valid to them. They're also going to likely remember your presentation best if you are the first salesperson to call on them, because you have the opportunity to set the stage and provide the foundation for the information, for the data, for the analysis. And then those that they hear after you, they're going to compare to you. So this is a situation where you would want to be first, and you definitely want to be on your game as you present. Okay, moving on. Listening. Listening is the keystone of the communication process and is the foundation on which the vast majority of relationships are based. It is an evidence of the fact that you care, going back to golden rule number 3 in chapter 5. You want to listen, and you want to listen with care and with empathy and with compassion and with intention. Observing is included in listening. So while you are listening for verbal cues and verbal messages, you also want to observe nonverbal messages communicated through body language, because sometimes the body language will tell us a different story from what is actually being said at face value. Sometimes the body language will very much complement what is being said verbally. And hopefully you're able to infer what is actually going on by watching somebody as you are listening to them. What world-class listeners do. These are some things that you want to make as tips and tricks when you're listening to somebody. World-class listeners adopt the proper attitude. They're positive, they're confident, they're friendly, they're open, and they are intensely curious. All these things show that you care about someone and what they have to say. Also showing that, they shut up and listen. They don't try to interject when someone is mid-sentence. They don't try to raise their own points and their own questions. They very much are paying attention to what they are being told. They are conscious of their body language. They try to make sure their body language indicates they are fascinated and eager to learn more, often leaning forward and nodding. So it's that idea of active listening that shows someone that you are taking in what they are trying to say. Also, they respect the other person's point of view. They see both sides of an argument. So you're not just sitting there with your point of view and thinking of ways to counteract that argument. You're actually taking what they have to say and you're processing it and trying to understand where it is they're coming from, trying to meet that person where they are at. Because not only does that give you an opportunity to understand them, when you do have to come back and perhaps say something towards your point of view, it may give you a sense not just of what it is you need to say, but how you need to say it. Because we all use words and language differently. And if you can come at them with their particular approach, sometimes with their definitions of words, because we all use words differently, those things are going to be valuable when it comes to really making sure that someone perceives the fact that you've paid attention to them and you are responding directly to them and meeting them on their level. World-class listeners listen and look for emotional cues. They're going to listen for how people say something and watch for the nonverbal cues in the process as well. We're a little more honest and a little more telling with our facial expressions, our gestures, our body movements. If we shuffle in a chair, if we tap our feet, those sorts of things. They give us a sense of really showing what our true colors are when we are paying attention to somebody or when we're in discussion. World-class listeners will listen and look for buying cues. They will watch very carefully for any little sign or movement that indicates another person has made a decision to agree with them or to buy. These could be things like a slight leaning forward, like they're looking forward to working with you. Maybe a tiny nod of the head in agreement. maybe a tension in their body that signals an intent to buy or to be able to begin the negotiating process. So you see that sense of excitement or anticipation or looking forward to what it is that's happening in the course of the conversation. Those are ways that you can kind of tell that maybe it is time to pull the trigger. Also, world-class listeners match speech, listening patterns, and movements of the speaker. World-class listeners let the other person set the pace. This is what we call synchronic listening or synchronic listening. This is that idea that we are trying to be in step with them. When we move with somebody else, we show a certain amount of agreement and a certain amount of participation, and those things are usually perceived positively. As long as we're not doing it in a way that we're trying to mimic someone in a patronizing or a disparaging sort of way. World-class listeners are patient. They know that if they listen patiently and courteously to everything others have to say without interrupting, that others will usually reciprocate and give them a courteous hearing as well. And then they pause often. World-class listeners pause after someone says something to make sure the other person is finished. Like any good interviewer, they know that a pause often prompts others to talk more, often revealing more than they intend to. We tend to be a little awkward when there's an elongated silence, and those that are not comfortable with that will usually speak up and perhaps expound a little more on something. And that can be very helpful to you when you're trying to gather information and make determinations on what it is that you need to be able to convey to them to help them along. So don't be afraid of the awkward pauses. It may be an opportunity for them to be able to expound a little bit more. World-class listeners are also going to listen actively, and they're going to summarize well. Brief summaries not only make points memorable through repetition, but they also focus the discussion and get it back on track if it's wandered. So you can restate what someone else has said, depending on the situation, either do it word for word or perhaps put it in different words to make sure that you are truly comprehending what it is they are saying. It's also an opportunity if a conversation kind of goes down a rabbit trail. If you pick up and say, well, a moment ago you were talking about this. Can you explain that a little more? Or can you kind of share what your thoughts on when it comes to that? It is a good way, number one, to show that you were listening, but also to get them to get back on topic and to learn more about what it is that they are seeking. So those are some things that you should do in listening. Now here are some don'ts. Don't listen judgmentally. Don't come up with something to say that is accusatory or look for ways to be accusatory. Don't interrupt and step on sentences. Listen to them completely. Listen to everything they have to say. Don't think of a rebuttal. World-class listeners pay full attention to the speaker and concentrate on listening carefully to every word without thinking of their comeback. Because if you're thinking about your comeback, you're not fully listening to what they have to say, and you may miss an important point that might actually be convincing. Also, they don't respond too soon. You let others finish a discussion, make as many points as they feel inclined to do, also raise any objections. This way you can get all the negatives out before you respond to something, and you can address them all in one sitting. If you respond too soon, they're looking defensive, maybe even in an interrupting sort of way. If you're just quick to kind of take over the conversation, again, it shows that sort of disinterest. It may kind of be a reactionary sort of thing where you're not fully focused on what it is you're trying to say, what it is you're trying to do, and it's very important that you maintain control in that way. World-class listeners do not react emotionally. They know the best way to counteract an attempt to make them angry or to get a rise out of them. You want to stay calm. Don't react emotionally. And basically, if you get caught up in that, you're being manipulated. So you want to avoid that as much as is possible. If you can keep cool-headed, it's also going to show that you have a certain command and control in terms of the subject matter. Don't become distracted. Too often people don't concentrate on looking at the person who is talking. They allow their attention to be diverted to other things, which shows a lack of respect for the person that is talking. Don't respond to negatives. This can reinforce positive statements or compliments. Allow you to do that at the very least. Starting with that, again, that idea of common ground, to say, I agree with you when it comes to this, or to say, yeah, it's true that such and such, whenever you're talking about a positive statement. So try not to focus too much on the negatives. Don't ask leading questions. Don't try to use manipulative questioning and selling techniques. Don't try to trick people into saying things that they don't intend to say. Again, you're trying to establish trust. You're trying to establish a certain level of honesty and integrity. So don't ask questions in such a way that they feel compelled to answer in a certain way, especially if that certain way is not true. And here's an interesting one. Don't take notes. World-class listeners prefer to focus intently on the other person and do their best to build empathy and rapport. And if you're taking notes, it can be difficult to do that because your eyes are fixated on your paper, you're fixated on what you're writing as opposed to being fixated on listening to the person talking. So taking notes can be a distraction from building rapport with the person that you're talking to. So some ways around this: maybe get permission to record the conversation. Maybe take opportunities to use that repetition method to repeat the things that was said to you back to them, which shows that you're listening and will also reinforce your mind as you're saying the things that were said to you. Those are different ways to be able to be a really effective listener and be an effective part of the conversation. Now, let's move on. Understanding nonverbal communication. How people say something is often more important than what they say. So words and word choice is important, but also the tone of the voice that we use, maybe the subtext of what we're saying, some of the things that we don't say, in light of how we're talking, those things are going to be very important and very telling. Look for attributes and postures that might indicate how the other person is receiving your message. Watch those nonverbal cues. Use gestures, space, enthusiasm, openness, proximity, eye contact. Use your body language to help you emphasize your sales points and to show customers that you care about them and that you're interested in them. But make sure your gestures are in sync with the person with whom you are talking. You don't want to be on a completely different wavelength from the person that you're talking to, but at the same time, you're also trying to create this environment that is positive, that is empathetic, that shows your passion for what it is that you're talking about, and also your intention to get as much as you can from the person talking to you. Now, feedback. You must give both verbal and nonverbal feedback, including gestures and expressions, and communicate the appropriate enthusiasm as you actively encourage people to open up. So feel free to let a few of your cards show in terms of how you are receiving a message, how you're processing things that has been told to you. Be as open as you can with that. The most important single thing that you can do in giving response to somebody is to smile. That shows a certain amount of positivity. That shows a certain amount of affirmation. As long as you're not smiling with some sort of sinister sort of look to yourself, like, oh, I got him, I got her. But the idea that you're trying to find that common ground, you're finding that agreement. Smile, be friendly, be positive in the ways that you listen to somebody, and then in the ways that you respond to them. So that's the first half of the chapter. We're going to continue on with the rest of chapter 6 over in the next video.